Okay, folks, I hope that you are well. In this quick video screencast thingy, I want to just point out a few tips on how to edit your iPhone photos to look like they came from your fancy camera, your DSLR, your mirrorless. You know, when we take pictures with our fancy camera, they have a unique look that for a long time has been really hard and difficult to replicate with just your iPhone, but it's getting closer. So I want to talk about the keys to editing your photo to where they look like they came from your fancy camera. The first thing is that you do need to use portrait mode, because that is one of the big differentiators between a fancy camera and your iPhone, is that your fancy camera can blur the background, give you that beautiful background blur to where everything's blurry except your subject. And that helps your subject pop off the background. It gives some isolation from your subject to the background. And that was always a dead giveaway that you shot it with a fancy camera, a real camera. Well, now we have portrait mode on the iPhone and similar modes on other Android phones. And what this does, well, I'll just get to the bottom line. It adds a background blur. And it's not perfect, but it has come a long way, and it's just wonderful. That is the first thing you'll need to do then, is to use portrait mode. And I'm not going to go into that in this particular video because we cover that in other videos and other posts. I want to talk about the editing process now. So let me bring up a picture. I'm just going to press plus here on Instagram. And then instead of all photos, just in case you don't know, you can filter and get, different ones, different folders. And I'm just going to go to favorites. And you'll see here a handful of pictures from our recent trip to Disney, which really sparked a handful of these posts and videos as we try and answer questions from that. So I'm just going to choose a photo. I don't even know which one. Let's do this one because it was fun and I love this one. And it was cold at Disney in January. We went like 30 degrees when we took this, but we still did it. So the first thing is you can crop it or not. For this one, I am going to crop it. And then I'm going to fill the frame to where I'm not just cutting off the very top of the castle. I'm going to fill the frame to where we're kind of still including their hands and their faces, but we still get some of the castle back there. So that's not a part of the tutorial, but that's why I'm cropping it the way I'm cropping it. So the next thing is to hit next to bring up our editing tools. Now at this point, I'm going to stop and give you basically the three-part process that I kind of make sure that I hit in order to get a DSLR quality-esque look, if that makes sense. So the three things are this. First of all, to apply a filter very lightly. Second of all is to use your edit tools wisely. And then third is to use the Lux filter. So that's where we're going. And let me then make one more disclaimer that portrait mode is great. Like these are all taken in portrait mode to where that castle's a little bit blurred. But the other thing that DSLR cameras do well and better, and that, mirrorless cameras, fancy cameras do well, is that honestly the picture comes out a little bit more flatter, meaning the shadows are a little bit more open, the highlights are a little bit more recovered. It doesn't have, honestly, as much punch as like an iPhone picture does. And there's reasons for that. But the bottom line is that if you want it to look more fancy camera-ish, you're going to have to do a little bit more counterintuitive things. And mainly, you're going to try and open up the dynamic range of the image a little bit and make it a little less crunchy, especially through the midtones. You'll probably see what I mean when I get to it. So let's get to it. The first thing I said is to apply filters, but apply them sparingly. Now, I always start with this, and sometimes I don't apply a filter. I just don't want the filtered look. But a lot of times, just a smidge of a filter will give it just a good touch. It'll take the picture in the right direction. But of course, if you apply any of these filters as I tap them at full strength, immediately it's like, oh, it's an iPhone pic. It's heavily edited. It has a filter on it. So the key then is to just reduce the strength of the filter. And you do that just by hitting on the filter again. So right now I'm on gingham. And then if I tap it again, you get the opacity slider. So you can go from 0% all the way to 100. So if you're going to apply just a smidge, you'd apply like, somewhere between 15 and 30%. Sometimes more. It just depends on the image, obviously. So I'm going to cancel that, and I'm just going to go through and look at my icons down here and maybe just see if there's one that I think takes it in the right direction. That doesn't to me. That looks kind of more like an iPhone pic than a DSLR, a fancy camera pic. But maybe this one, well, that makes it warmer. I tell you what, for the most part, I have a contrasty image anyway. And this kind of makes it very, very contrasty. I'm actually going to come to this one because it lessens the contrast. If I tap on the picture and hold it, you can see that it opens up those shadows. And that is where I want to go to get like a DSLR quality image, is I kind of want to open up the image. So this is kind of already a step in the direction I want to go. It's just very warm and kind of washed out. So again, I'm just going to take that down and just apply like a tiny smidge of it, like 30%. And I'm going to click done. So I always do that usually first because that is a big lever. Like applying a filter really changes the picture. So if I go do all this kind of specific editing and then apply the filter later, then I usually have to go in and change my specific edits again because the filter just does so much. So that's why I start with the filter. So the next thing then is that I'm going to click on the edit button on the bottom right here, and this brings up all of our editing tools. Now, I kind of have a little bit of a formula in mind that I'm going to share with you, and it's these 6 things. I'm going to actually reduce the contrast, and then usually I end up increasing the brightness because I usually take my iPhone photos a little bit underexposed, or by default, the iPhone will usually underexpose the image. So 9 times out of 10, I will then have to increase the brightness. And then I increase the black level to give me some of that contrast back, but very localized, only in the deepest shadows. And then I tweak the color only if needed. A lot of times I don't need to. And then I add in some blur, some more blur, and then I sharpen it. And then I'm done with the editing panel. So that's the process. I usually do those 6 things, but let me do it very quickly. So the contrast, I usually lessen the contrast. And that, again, opens up the shadows and kind of recovers some of the highlights. Like, look at the cheeks and then the clothes, and you can see that it gets flatter. Now, a lot of people are like, I like the contrasty look. And I understand that, especially if you're used to just seeing only your iPhone pics. But again, I'm going towards a DSLR look, like making this look like it was shot with a fancy camera. And I know that the first thing I need to do is flatten out the image quite a bit. So I'm just going to put it there for now. You can always come back to this. And then usually I increase the brightness because, again, 9 times out of 10, it doesn't have to be a ton, but again, 9 times out of 10, the iPhone will kind of underexpose for the most part, especially if you're used to shooting with your fancy camera and kind of exposing just for the skin tones and letting other things blow out. So I'm going to increase it just a little bit. And you might be saying, wow, that looks really washed out. Well, this next thing, when you go to shadows, this is what's going to give you that contrasty look, like the weight that I think a picture needs, which is a black level, without affecting the midtones, like the skin tones and whatnot. So I'm going to increase or decrease the black levels to where I get that bottom end snap again, but you can see that the face is still in the midtones. They still aren't getting too much contrast. It's just those black levels. So I kind of get some snap back on the bottom end of the image. So I like where I'm at. This is where I would then wonder if I want to kind of warm up the picture or cool it down. Just so overall color grading, and I would usually only do it with warmth. And you can either go cooler to warmer. And I know that the filter added a little bit of warmth, so I'm just going to leave it like it is for now, because if I want to add more warmth, I could probably come back to the filter at the end, and I just know that from experience. But I don't really, it's pretty warm right now, and for my taste, I like it where it's at. So the final 2 things is that tilt, shift, and sharpen. And by the way, often I do implement a little bit of a vignette. And so I'll do that here, just a little bit of one. A little bit goes a long way. Usually if I'm editing my DSLR photos, I'll end up adding a vignette in Lightroom or Luminar or something like that. So I'll definitely do that here. So the blur and the sharpness comes with tilt, shift, and sharpen. So tilt shift, I'm going to click, and I'm just going to apply for this one probably a radial tilt shift. And you can move this around with your finger and then pinch in and out to make it bigger or smaller. I'm just going to kind of make sure it covers their faces. And then you can see that it adds, if I review it here, whoops, I moved it on and off. You can see that it does blur out the whatever's outside of the mask a little bit, which is going to be obviously the castle behind them. So that just gives a little bit more of that background blur, and it's not the same, but it's just helping out the cause. You can do it linearly, but I'm not going to do that one now. I'm just going to press done. And then sharpen is a big one. I really like what Instagram has done with their sharpen little filter here because it just does a good job. So I usually am pretty aggressive with it, like at least 50. And it really just sharpens up those edges without kind of ruining skin again. So I'm going to hit done there, and then to kind of see before and after where we were, I can just hold on the picture, and you can see that we lifted all those tones in the face, and it's a little bit warmer, but the biggest thing is that it's just the face tones, the skin tones have been lifted from the original. The last thing I want to say here is that we need to apply the Lux filter. So the Lux filter is this little icon on the top here that looks like the sun. And so Lux, you can see at 0, and then if you go up, it just kind of does this artificial intelligence kind of deal to it, and I think it just always takes it over the top. And so I love it. It usually adds in some contrast where needed. It kind of pops the color. It just kind of does its thing, and I love it. I usually apply it somewhere between 30 and 50%. Sometimes more, but here I'm not going to go too much more, maybe about 53, and I'm just going to click done. So now we go from before to after, before to after. So you can see that the overall integrity of the look of an unfiltered image is there, but we've really opened up the shadows and opened up the midtones, so to speak. It's a little less crunchy. It's a little bit brighter. It looks like it was more exposed manually. And we just get a little bit more of that blur and a little bit of that critical sharpness where we need it. It all results in a picture that looks like it was taken more with a fancy camera. So I'm going to actually download this, save it to my camera roll, and then let's do one more picture really quick. I'm just going to discard this because I don't want to post it. I'm going to cancel. Whoops. I'm going to do one more picture here. I will go to favorites again. And let's do one where I'm going to have to apply a linear tilt shift so I can show you how to do that. Probably this one right here would be good, the one we're actually looking at. So this time, I'm still going to do square because then I crop out the bags on the bottom right and I crop out my finger shading the sun on the top left. So right there, and that's good. So I'm just going to click next to show that picture. So the next thing is just picking a filter that we think might move it in the right direction. I'm just kind of tapping and looking here. Oh, Nashville's kind of cool. I'm going to go with that and just apply it a tiny bit. You see how it kind of just warms up the sky a little bit. So I'm just going to add it very slightly, something like that. Hit done. And I'm going to just do what we talked about. I'm going to lessen the contrast, which is going to make it less crunchy. I'm going to brighten it up a little bit, make it that kind of high key look, or like I, really exposed for the skin tones. I'm going to get back my kind of weight of those black levels. And I'm not going to mess with the color temperature again. I'm not even going to do a vignette with this one. But I'm going to add the tilt shift this time linearly, just across their kind of faces here, down towards the bottom. And you can see that really blurs out kind of those trees. Something like that. And then I'm going to sharpen it up a good amount. And I think we're good there. And then I'm just going to do the old Lux. I'm just going to go left and right. And I think I like it pretty heavy, but then I want to make it even a little bit brighter. So I'm going to go back to the brightness and bring it up a little to about right there. And then there we go. We got before and after. Before and after. And it just looks a little bit more DSLR-ish. So I'll save that one too. Okay, so with that said, hopefully this helps. It might seem like it's too much, like it's going to take forever, but as with anything, I can assure you, if you just do it a few times, you'll get to where you can do this in 30 seconds. And if you're just looking for this kind of look, like a look that's not over-edited, then it's worth the 20 or 30 seconds that it'll take, and you'll get the hang of it. So if you have any questions or any good ideas that we could add to this, please let us know. We'd love to hear from you, but that's all for now. Thanks so much.